Welcome to Obsessive Outlining. My name is Melanie Nichols, but I publish under my initials M.A. Nichols. And I am an indie author who started publishing in September of 2016. So it's been about 2.5 years. And in that time, I've published 8 novels and 3 novellas, spanning 3 separate series in various genres. And I am an obsessive outliner. I really have not stated that in the title of this class. At any given point during this presentation, each and every one of you are probably going to think I'm crazy, insane, and way tightly wound. So, but this is a process that I have developed over years of writing. A process that works well for me. It may or may not work well for you. That is okay. Everyone's individual, and the way you discover what works for you is by learning how other people do it. Pick what works, glean little bits from it, try things out, and then adapt to how you work and the way you approach writing. So that's my little caveat there. Yeah, seriously, you guys will think I'm insane at some point because little background. My job is I'm a transportation planner and an urban planner, which basically means I'm supposed to take all these different possible issues that might happen in a city, put them all together, and then try and predict the future to be able to build a city so it doesn't break down, which means I'm all about the details, I'm all about looking at all the possible angles of things, and that definitely comes out in my outlining. So, yeah, that's the explanation. Now, my process generally takes about 4 steps. I have this 4-step process that I generally spend. Well, brainstorming is a nebulous thing and takes a long time. But when I actually start down to officially start outlining, I plan for about 4 weeks. I give myself a month to work on my outline. I go through these 4 different steps that each one builds on the next one. And by the end of this process, I want to have an outline that honestly is about generally 30 pages long. I estimate for my own writing, I get about 2,500 words per page of my outline. And so I want to have at least 30 pages to 40 pages, depending on if I'm doing a full novel or novella, of course. So yeah, that's my process, just an overview of it. And each one will build off another and work all together. Now, before I jump into how I do this, I want to give you the benefits of why I do this, because like I said, you guys are going to think I'm crazy. I'm just going to keep hitting that home. This is a little over the top. I don't know I've ever met another author who approaches it this way to the level that I do. But one of the reasons why I do it is I don't know about you, but I struggle with writer's block. When I'm getting down and I'm writing a novel, the thing I struggle most with is what is supposed to happen next. Through my outlining process, I condense most of that down to that 3 to 4 weeks that I spend on my outline. I figure out all the plot ahead of time so that when I sit down, I can just focus on writing. And I get far less frustrated with myself because I already know what the story's going to be. I don't have to be hitting my head against the keyboard saying, what's going to happen, what's going to happen? I already know it. And now I won't say it eliminates all writer's block, because like I said, I deal with it a lot during the outlining process. That's why I take several weeks to do it. But it minimizes it significantly. On top of that, I end up writing faster, because when I can focus just on the writing itself, my words come a lot faster. Again, things slow down when I have to actually figure out what I'm trying to say. All I need to do is figure out how to say it. And honestly, for me, NaNoWriMo is not an issue. I usually get at least 1,000 to 2,000 words per hour. And that's something that I totally attribute to my outlining process, because I can just focus on the words. And the words are so much easier to get out than the story. And then in the end, probably my biggest thing that I love about outlining in great detail, I don't have much issue with my first draft. I, of course, have to go back and polish it and edit it, and all that. But I can't tell you the last time I had to delete a scene from a book. I can't tell you the last time I had to throw out a chapter of writing. I don't know about you guys, but when I've put my heart and soul into a chapter worth of work, the last thing I want to do is delete it. Of course, I do it if I have to improve the book, but I would prefer to figure out the flaws in my story before I write them, before I spend those hours writing those stories. And so I love outlining like this because honestly, by the end, I have a draft that really only requires polishing on about the language and the writing. And there's some tweaking here and there, of course. I mean, no one's perfect, but I don't have that issue as much. My first book, I did not have as good of a approach to outlining, and I had to rewrite the thing like 7 times. And even after that 7th time, when I actually had an outline, was working hard on it, I still had to cut off the first third of my book. I hate that feeling so much. So I try to really, really make sure that my story is working before I write the story. So I just feel like I have to really explain this because there are really good things to being this crazy. So, first step, brainstorming. Brainstorming is a very nebulous step. I include it as part of the process because it is part of the process. But there's not really a beginning and end date. There's no time limit that I put on brainstorming. I know most of you guys are familiar with the term, of course. We all have heard of the term brainstorming before. But I just want to go over some of the ways that I brainstorm and what this stage looks like for me. Usually it starts with an idea or a character. Those lovely what-if questions you ask yourself. Or at least, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy and I'm the only one who does think those things. But when I'm sitting there sometime and I'm thinking about books I love or movies I love, sometimes I start getting those thoughts of, what if ... Like my second series is a series based on around a guy who is a fairy tale villain consultant. And his job is to help fairy tale villains succeed. And that literally started with a single question: what if there was a guy who was a fairy tale villain consultant? I was actually watching Mary Poppins and thinking, originally I was like, well, what if I had an evil Mary Poppins? I'm like, well, she's actually kind of evil. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, she takes these kids on this incredible adventure and then tells them they're liars when they talk about it later. Tells them to shut up and go to bed. I mean, that's not exactly normal or nice. And so it got me thinking, I'm like, well, what if the fairy tale villains needed a consultant? And I don't know, it kind of led from there. And I built an entire series around that one what-if character idea. Yes?
What's the name of that series? Because I think I'm going to have to buy it.
It's called the Villainy Consultant Series. The first book is Jeffrey P. Ward's Guide to Villainy, and it's his how-to guide for fairy tale villains. It's written like a nonfiction, giving all his advice using fairy tales as examples. And let me just tell you, the fairy tale heroes are not as nice as they like to think they are. But I start with that idea, or that character, and I start figuring out who is going to be in this story. It's all really vague at this point. I think of it kind of like when you're a kid, and you have your dolls or your action figures or something, and you start kind of playing out these vague ideas of scenes, thinking, well, who is this character going to be? Is he going to be a good guy, a bad guy, an introvert, an extrovert? I start kind of just playing around and getting an idea for who this person is, who the characters will be in this story. And then I'll also start thinking about conflicts. And again, playing with these characters, you start throwing them together, and pretty soon they start having conflicts with each other. They start having issues with each other. Let's face it, you put 2 people in a room, you're going to have a conflict at some point. And I start just kind of playing around with that, and honestly, it's a lot of random scenes that I'll come up with in my head as I get to know these characters and kind of fall in love with them and get interested in them, and I start having these ideas. And then, of course, I work on building my world. I am a huge believer in organized magic systems, in having a lot of information about my world, because, of course, I'm an organized person, if you haven't noticed yet. One thing to keep in mind with it is I really think a very, very important aspect of brainstorming that I think a lot of writers fall short on is every movie, every book that you are reading, any kind of media you are consuming, you should be constantly looking at what do you like in it and why, specifically why. Because those will spark ideas in your own books. Frankly, those will give you ideas that you can borrow for your own books, not necessarily steal and copy, but adapt for your own use. I have a lot of documents that I keep just of notes of my favorite books, of all the things I like about them, even maybe the chapter, so that I can go back and find the spot in the book. And I keep very detailed notes about all my books and my movies of what I like, and pacing that works, the characters that work, the conflicts that are interesting. Honestly, my friends and family hate going to movies with me because I spend the entire time analyzing it. And as much as I do love writing, I do hate the fact that it has ruined most movies and books for me because all I can do is this. However, it has made my books better, which is really the important part. So I really think this is a very important part. And the more you spend time analyzing what other people have done and what they've done right and done wrong, you'll be able to adapt that for your own writing. And this is a step you cannot rush. Like I said, it's nebulous. It starts with an idea, but then frankly, I can take months, if not years. If I'm building a world, I can literally take years at time to build it, because I really want to know my world before I start sending my characters out to play in it. And it depends on what I'm writing, of course. I do write some historical romance, and of course that's set in a world I know. It's the real world, and so I don't have to build magic systems. I don't have to do any of that. So it may only take me 3 or 4 months of thinking about these characters and getting to know these characters before I sit down and outline them. I have other ideas that have been sitting on my hard drive for 5, 6 years as I've kind of mulled them over. And honestly, I love brainstorming so much because this is how I keep myself entertained during really long, boring meetings. I swear all my coworkers think that I'm really a diligent note taker, but I'm really sitting and writing down brainstorming ideas and scenes, and I would love to use my phone to keep it all straight, but I don't want them to think I'm texting, so I sit there and write, and they just think I'm really on top of things, and they don't know the truth. I will do a really quick plug. I know that a lot of us are analog. I can't tell you how much I love having those pretty little journals of all these different writing notes up on my shelves, and it was really hard for me to let go of them. But when you are brainstorming, there's so many ideas that you come up with, and the more you brainstorm, the more ideas come. It's really important to be able to keep them organized, and having them analog is a system to lose notes, basically. I finally switched over to doing everything digital. I love Google Drive because I can use it on my phone. I can use it on every single computer I access has that access to Google Drive. And I love it because I can copy and paste, and I can search through my notes. I can keep them organized because I can't tell you how many times I've lost notebooks full of ideas. I've lost pages, or I've misplaced things, or I remember that there was a note about something, but I can't find it again. And so I go through it, and I have dozens and dozens of documents on my hard drive under a folder called Plot Ideas. And I keep all of them organized in very, very, subfolders and categories. Like I've got documents full of just snippet ideas, little what-if sentences that I haven't had a chance to really think out. And then as I start thinking about certain ones of them, and start getting ideas for it, I'll pull it out, have its own document, and then I start writing down all these ideas I start having. If I'm building a world, I will have dozens of folders full of information about the races that are involved in that, the magic systems, the history, all that stuff, and I keep it very, very organized and write everything down. I'll just tell you, there is really no such thing as a bad idea in the moment. Later you might go back and decide it's a crap idea. But in the moment, write everything down, keep it organized, and don't be afraid to go digital. There are times when I have to write down things by hand, like when I'm in meetings and want to look like I'm productive. But the minute I can, I go type those up and put them into my folders so I don't lose them. Again, I've lost so many good notes, and it's just really, I got so frustrated that I switched over, and I really, just want to hit this again. This is a really great tool. At the end of my brainstorming process, I want to have identified the main characters in my story. I'm talking the heroes, the villains, and the POV characters, anyone who's important. Because of course these are going to be the main people in the story. And so by this time I should have at least a vague idea of who they are, what role they play. I want to know what the general plot line is going to be and where the character arcs are going to be, because these are the sources of conflict in my book. I'm not talking about having a very clear-cut, defined idea of it. I'm talking more of like a book blurb back, of what the story is going to be about. Is it going to be about them, my first book is a YA contemporary fantasy, and I just knew that the main story was going to be about this ancient evil that is locked in this medallion, and the bad guys are trying to open it up and unleash this army, and the good guys are going to stop them. I mean, that's really all I had in general idea of what the story is going to be like. I also knew, okay, who were going to be characters and who was going to get a character arc, like who's going to change in that story. Or for example, the second book in my Villainy Consultant series, it is an actual novel, and it tells my main character's backstory. So I knew that I wanted to show the quest, because he started off as a hero, he goes on a quest and decides the heroes are awful and becomes a villain and consultant instead. So I knew that was a plot line I wanted to have. And that's pretty vague, right? But I also knew, well, in his present day life, he's going to get sucked into a new quest by a princess that he shouldn't like, but he likes, and she sucks him to a new quest, and he ends up becoming a hero instead, so that there would be these two intersecting plot lines. And I knew that the princess needed a character arc. I knew that there was going to be a subplot. As I played with the princess, I realized, oh, she's got a sister, and she's got this cute little romantic subplot with the prince. And so I just had these very vague ideas, and really nothing super firm, but like I said, the book, kind of like the back blurb or a cliff note version of it, like just very, very, very brief. And then I want to have the world built. Again, how can you have your characters play in a world if you don't understand the world? I personally like having my world built. Of course, it's not 100%. There's still going to be things that you're not going to realize you're going to need to know at some point in it, but that I should have a very firm idea of what my world is, who the various, races, the magic system, the history, things that are really important that will affect the story in general. Once I have that, I move on to the plot beats. Now, if you're not familiar with what plot beats are, they are basically the key pivotal moments in a story that form the structure of that story. They are those main moments in the story that pushes the story forward and forms the structure. And there's a lot of different ways to go about plotting a novel. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about actual plotting because that is a huge thing, and there are a lot of schools of thought. For example, if any of you are familiar with Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, that's a 15-point. He has 15 plot beats that all need to be hit in order for a story to be structured correctly and paced correctly. There is the 3-act structure, which has 9 to 10 plot points that you have to hit. I am personally a fan of the 7-point structure. And basically what it is it just tells me, by about 25% through the book, I need to have this happen. By about 50% of the book, through the book, I need to have this happen. Otherwise, it starts to feel slow and sluggish, and it's not paced properly. Now, for my plot beats, what I generally do, I have a plot sheet, is what they call them. I'm going to pull it up because it's really a lot easier to actually see it. One sec. Okay, so what I have is in this column C, those are all the plot points. Row B or column B is the name of the plot point. Column C, I gave myself a couple sentences to remind myself what needs to happen in that plot point. Then I have my plot, and all those empty cells need to be filled with a scene that will achieve what's in B and C. I will tell you, this plot sheet It's one I've developed for various different types of plot points and plot lines, and because a romance story is plotted differently than an action story, a drama featuring a lot of character development is different than a big, Mission Impossible type story. If you are interested in this, I will have a link that will on my website that you can go to and download it. So because I spent so much work actually developing this thing that I love sharing it, because at least maybe it will do some other people good too. So anyway, they're basically, it's just those basic moments that I need to have in my story. Otherwise, the story won't seem complete. It'll seem sluggish. It won't be a complete beginning, middle, end good story. And basically what I just do is I take those brainstorming ideas that I've had, because while I'm brainstorming, I'll think of some scenes maybe. I'll think of some details in the book, because as you start brainstorming, random things will pop into your head, like, ooh, wouldn't it be nice if I had a scene where so-and-so meets so-and-so and they go off on this quest, or they, little things like that. I always feel like I need to apologize a little bit, because describing a process is so difficult, because it's how my brain thinks, and the way my brain thinks isn't always normal and isn't necessarily how your brain thinks. So I hope this makes sense. I've presented to this many of my friends, and they all assured me it made sense, so I'm hoping. If not, please ask questions. Anyway, so I'll go and I will take and set up a plot sheet for each of those plot lines. Because usually you have at least one main storyline, a main plot. You usually have at least one subplot, something else going on, because you gotta have a little variety, right? And then usually I have at least 2 character arcs, and then maybe a third, another subplot. I usually have about 4 to 5 plot lines that are going on in my book. And each one of them is gonna get their own sheet, because each one of them needs to have each of these plot beats, or that individual storyline isn't gonna be complete and paced properly. And so at this stage, I treat them each as individual entities, because that's what they are. Yes?
Really quick, what are examples of the 4 to 5? Is it romance, main plot,
Yeah, I've got the what? Could you?
That you have the 4 to 5 sheets, what plots do you mean?
Oh, for example, going back to the quest book that I mentioned earlier, I would have a plot sheet for the quest that turns him into a villain, his backstory. I would have a plot sheet for the quest that he's going on right now, because that is another plot line. I would have a story sheet for the princess, because she gets a character arc. She goes and runs away from home, basically, and she comes to understand the world a little bit better, and she grows. And so I have a sheet for her. I have a sheet for Jeffrey is the main character, the villainy consultant. He has a character arc that, and frankly, actually, in that case, I had 2 sheets for him, because he has a character arc becoming a villain, and he has a character arc going to becoming a hero. I also had a character arc for a romantic subplot that was on with the side characters. And because I knew those were the main storylines. Or for example, the book I'm working on right now is a historical romance. And I have the romantic main plot line. Of course, boy meets girl, they fall in love, everything's wonderful. That is one of the main plot line in the story. The heroine is also going to get her own character arc, because she's young and immature, and she needs to grow up, and she has a bunch of things that happens and makes her grow up. I have a romantic subplot with her parents, because they're having a rough time, and it's about them falling back in love. I have a subplot that's a conflict between her and her mother, because she's growing up and her mother doesn't want to let go, and there's a conflict there. And then I also have a plot line that is her mother's backstory, because her mother is cold and frigid, and I need to explain to the readers why she's that way, so that they will love her and not hate her, because she's getting her own romantic subplot, and you want people to love your romantic heroes and heroines. So yeah, I honestly, generally, I have about 5 different plot lines in most of my full-length novels. And then, so each one of them gets their own sheet, and then I just start plugging in if I have brainstorming ideas that will fit into these things. Like, for example, one of the plot points is where is the character starting out? I should know that already, because I know the character, right? I've already decided who he is. So I can fill in some information there, just really brief stuff. I usually know one of the last plot points is, what's the conclusion? What's the resolution? And that's something I generally know. The good guys win. I may even have an idea of how they win at that point. And then there's all different points, and I just start trying to find scenes that I've already come up with and start plugging them in where I can that will fit. And then, of course, I'm going to have lots of holes all in there because not all of my ideas will actually be part of the story structure. They may still make it into the book, but they're not the main points in the story. But once I have that kind of starting to plug in, it starts to formulate an idea and make it a little more clearer to me what's lacking in the story. And I can start coming up with ideas of like, okay, well maybe this certain plot twist needs to be this scene. And it starts helping me coalesce the ideas I've already had and start brainstorming some new ideas to plug in there. And I will say, like I said, we don't have time to go into exactly how to plot all together, unfortunately. On my website, with the direct link that I'm going to have, I have a presentation on there that is by Sarah M. Eden. If you're not familiar with her, she's a historical romance writer. And she gave a presentation at Storymakers Conference a couple years ago where she talked about the 7-point structure and then also applied it to how to use it in romance novels. It's an incredible presentation. I happen to have the PowerPoint PDF of it, so I've got it up there. If you want to learn a little bit more about 7-point structure, I highly recommend looking at it. Yes?
She's added 2 more points.
Oh, has she? Well, yeah, she calls it the 7-point structure, but because it's romance, she had to adapt it a little bit. What I love about that presentation is it shows how you can adapt the 7-point structure to different types of plot lines. And so it's not technically public anymore, so that's why I have it. It's a direct link that you have to go to. If you can't find it on the direct link that's going to be at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, feel free to take my card or and email me, and I'll get it to you directly.
Dan Wells also teaches this.
Yeah, she based the first part of it off of Dan Wells's formula. Yeah, 7-point.
I know he stole from somebody else too.
That's what authors do. We
yeah.
steal and make it our own.
You're welcome.
So anyway, honestly, if you want to go into really how to go about doing it, again, I wish I had time to actually do that, but that is a really good place to look. And let's see, plugins, brainstorming ideas. And so then you start filling it in, and honestly, as I start working on this, as I start plugging stuff in, it really does start to spark more ideas, and I start seeing how scenes can work together. I may realize, okay, this is a certain conflict that needs to happen at this point, and oh my goodness, it'll spark an idea for a scene that needs to come before it. And so I start being able to get those ideas and putting them together. At the end of this stage of the process, I want to have my tentpole moments identified. That's what each of those cells in my spreadsheet, those are the tentpole moments. Those are what are going to form the skeleton of your story. Those are going to be the absolute key pivotal moments that are going to push your story forward, that are going to give it good pacing, that are going to give it the right structure it needs to stand up to reading and be interesting. At this point, it's still not detailed. I usually only have a couple sentences where I know that, say, in a romance, one of the plot points is I need to have a scene where the hero and heroine meet and their relationship begins. Usually it's something like, well, I know that they're at a party and they meet through a friend, or it's maybe the meet cute. And I'll have just a couple brief sentences that describe this idea that I have. Now, this is where it starts to get tricky, though, because now I have each of these 4 or 5 plot lines. They're not going to each be separate entities anymore. I have to integrate them. I have to get them together because you're going to weave them through between each other, right? I mean, you're not going to have the main plot line beginning, middle, end, and then go on to a subplot. You're going to have to stagger them between each other. To do this, I take each of the cells on the spreadsheet and I copy and paste it into a Word document, because Word is just easier to use on this point. I like using Excel for the other because it's easier to visualize it that way. You want to keep every plot line is separate, and I color code it. Okay, I'm going to show you what it looks like here. So this is one of my actual outlines that I use for the book that I'm writing right now. I usually keep a little color code so I remember which plot line is which, because believe me, you will forget. And what I do is I have all of those bullet points. Those are the cells that were in that spreadsheet. And I have a little space there and a space after it. That is one storyline. The orange goes down. I have all that. That is another storyline. And we have a space. That is the next storyline. That's the next storyline. And then that's the final storyline. Honestly, the mother's backstory, for example, I knew very, very clearly. For some reason, her story came very easy to me. So I only wrote down like 5 or 6 words to remind me what each scene of those is. Anyway, and so I have all of these 5 storylines separate. And then what I do is I start taking those. I take the main plot line, because you know what your main plot line is. That's the big story that you really want to tell. And then I take one of the other plot lines, and I start looking to see where they can meet up. Because once you've worked through this, honestly, there's a lot of times where you can realize, oh my gosh, these 2 different plot points can happen in the same scene. For example, in this book, I have a scene where, I knew that this plot point needed to happen at a ball. And I had this other, plot line where I knew this one needed to happen at a ball. Well, there's no reason why those can't happen at the same ball, right? I don't have to have multiple balls to have the same separate, keep those separate. And so I start grouping them together. Be careful that you don't put them out of order. Honestly, I usually keep a copy of that sheet and work off a separate copy, because I can't tell you how many times I start moving things around and then lose track of which plot point's supposed to go where. And then that's bad, because now your plot is unstructured. And so I start doing that. Here, actually, let me show you. And then I start, honestly, there's a lot of those leftover brainstorming ideas that are good scenes that need to happen, but they don't necessarily fit into the plot structure. And so I start entering them in here. Now let me show you. This is the exact same sheet, now integrated. So that first bullet point is an individual scene. It's again, it was really short. I knew exactly what the scene was going to be. I didn't need to describe it any more than I knew that the hero's brother was going to die, and it was going to be at his funeral. And that was the prologue. Space. That tells me that's a new scene. Keep that separate. All of those bullet points between the spaces is one scene. Look at that. There are 3 separate plot lines that are all going to intersect in one individual scene. And those can all go together. Now, the black part are things that that are coming from my brainstorming ideas. Some of them are character motivations and things that are starting as the story is becoming more clear in my mind. In this step, I start adding in little details. For example, that scene right there. See the space, the 2 bullet points. That was a scene that I never brainstormed, but as I was going through this, I realized, the hero needs a scene of his own, because various reasons why, but I just knew that in order for his character development, I needed to have another scene with him by himself. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to put in a scene where he's by himself and he's struggling with his internal conflict that's going to resolve itself at some point. There's another scene. This was actually a scene I brainstormed, where I was going to have a conflict between the mother, who's a secondary character, but she's going to get her own romantic subplot, so she's an important secondary character. I knew I needed a scene. I had an idea for a scene that was great character development. It didn't fit in my plot structure. It's not important to the plot structure, but it is important for the reader to be able to sympathize and empathize with my character. And so there's a new scene. And so I just went through, and each one of these, again, there's a scene where 3 of my plot lines all intersect. There's some scenes where that's an individual, sorry about that. That orange one, that is an individual scene where it's on its own. There's nothing else to do. There's only one plot line that's going to be in that one individual scene. And so that's just what I start doing, and it's amazing how as I start putting them together, the story starts to coalesce in my mind. It starts coming together, and I start getting more ideas and seeing what's missing, what's not, what's superfluous, and it starts really giving me a very clear picture of what the story is. I will tell you right now, not all your brainstorming ideas will be used. Some of them sound like really good story, ideas in the moment, but frankly, they just don't fit into the story. That happens. That's okay. That's a darling. You need to kill it right now. And then, as I mentioned, I start adding in add filler scenes, transitions, anything that needs to happen, because just because you have one plot point that's important and another plot that's important doesn't mean there's not a lot of stuff that needs to happen between those things that need to build up to those individual scenes. Otherwise, the story is disjointed. Yes?
Is that where a lot of your leftover brainstorming goes, but doesn't fit into plot?
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, I would say at least half of the stuff that goes into my, into this outline isn't something I brainstormed. Honestly, a lot of it just kind of comes with it. But yeah, a lot of the leftover brainstorming ideas do end up as fillers or transitions. Like, it's great that you need to have this specific conflict, but there's usually things that need to come before you can reach that conflict. So you need to start adding all of those in. By the end of this phase, I have a skeleton outline. This is honestly where most authors stop. If they do outline, this is the most detail they generally go into. But at this point, I want to make sure that all my scenes are identified. Honestly, this should have every scene in it because I've identified all the main scenes and everything that needs to happen between those main scenes to make it make sense. And honestly, at this point, the plot is mostly finalized, like 99% finalized. Things will change still in the next phase, but honestly, it doesn't generally change it too much. And at this point, I know what my book is going to be. And at this point, you should have the pacing very clear. One of the reasons why I color code it is because it's really nice to go through it and have a visual indicator of, oh my gosh, it's been 2 pages since I've talked about my orange storyline. That's way too long of a gap. And so I know I need to put some stuff in to either change the pacing or remind people that this other plot line is going on. And so that's why I like color coding it. It just makes it easier to visually see how long it's been until since I've addressed a certain plot line. And frankly, if you have 5 or 6 red points all in a row, you're spending way too much time in that one individual section on one plot line. Does that make sense? Getting nods? Okay. Occasionally I get the vacant stares, and so I just wanted to check. Did I see a... Yeah.
And at this point, you've not written anything, no dialogue, nothing that's actually writing of the book. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Even
this
if
is...
you're just like, oh, I'd love to, this line would be so...
Sometimes I do that. It depends on... honestly, during brainstorming, I write down anything that sounds good. And during this point, anything that does come to mind that I really, really like, I might add into this outline just to remind myself, I really like that idea. And sometimes I will do, write dialogue. Honestly, if you look back at the last sheet, there are a lot more bullet points in there than what are in the cells. I start adding things as I go along, because you start getting ideas and these scenes become realer and realer to you and fill out more.
So are scenes for you, are they equal to a chapter? Or will a chapter
Completely depends. There's no tried or true method to it, because there are some scenes that take 2 or 3 chapters, honestly. Like if I have a big ball scene where I've got, like that first one that had 3 or 4 plot lines all intersecting, that's probably going to be at least 2 chapters, because there's a lot of information to get through, but it's all technically one scene. There's other scenes that will be only a page, and really short. Yes?
I guess then just have you clarify what do you include in one scene, because it always needs to happen at the same point in time.
Yeah, well, it's just one of those things that as you start looking at it, you get a feeling that things can come together. It's hard to, sometimes it's like while I'm filling out the spreadsheet, I already know that certain things are going to be at the same scene. Like, for example, one person, I just know, okay, well, they need to have this issue or this plot point happens at a specific ball, and I instantly just know it's going to happen together. I keep using the ball because that was an easy way to organize things. But it honestly, it's just one of those things that as you do it more and more, you start getting a feel for it. And it's a little hard to describe why I know it just works, why it does or So now this is the final step. This is where it really goes into the crazy level. Because for me, this is not enough. What I tend to do is I then sit down with that outline that I have, and I go through each scene. And I basically do the writer's equivalent of storyboarding it in my mind. I literally picture the scene and what it's going to look like. I picture where the characters are going to be. I picture the whole thing out. And I start writing down details that I need to know in order to remember it later. For example, I will identify my POVs. In one of my books, I had 6 POV characters. I wanted to make sure I had each scene identified with who's going to be it so I didn't have to figure it out later. Character motivations, that's a big thing. If I know that my character is bored, I'm just going to write, she's bored, so that will inform me, and I don't have to guess that later. And then I usually will go through, I don't tend to outline dialogue a lot, but what I will do is I know that in this scene, these certain points need to be hit. For example, I had a fight between a husband and wife, and I'm not going to write the dialogue, because honestly, dialogue to me works better if I pants it and because it seems more natural in the moment. But I did have a dozen different points that this husband and wife were each going to need to get to at some point in the dialogue, so I knew what needed to be accomplished in the discussion, but not necessarily how to say it. I've tried outlining dialogue, it just always ends up stilted for me.
Are these each in a separate document or a separate page, or like where do you write it?
I just expand on it. I literally just take the exact same document. I usually then change it all to black and take out the color coding, and I just start writing in it, directly into it. And that's basically it. I mean, I go through and I want to know everything I need to know. Because honestly, as I go through this process and start actually picturing the scene, that's where I find a lot of the plot holes and character inconsistencies. That's the moment when I sit there and say, oh my gosh, so-and-so is supposed to be in this scene, but I just sent him to another country. He's not even in the area. I can't do that. And so then I can go back and change this now. Or, for example, this is when I start trying to picture it. I'm not writing at this point, but this is what I would do if I were in the writing process. This is what you do when you are writing, is you picture the scene, right? And then you write it out. I just do it at this point so that I start seeing, oh my gosh, these are the issues, these are the areas that are problems. Scenes may get deleted at that point. I might need to add more scenes. I may need to move things around. And I really basically work through the whole thing, play it out as a movie in my head, and then write down all the notes I need to know to be able to recreate it later. And honestly, this is, to me, is one of the most important steps there, because a lot of authors do stop there, but this is where I catch all the problems. This is where I catch the plot holes, the character inconsistencies. Honestly, like it to me helps so much because I picture the whole thing, the whole story as one whole rather than each chapter individually, each scene individually. I'm looking at the whole thing, playing it all the way through from beginning to end. It's basically doing the movie version in my head of my book. And that honestly helps me so much. Yes?
Is this where you put in like foreshadowing?
Yeah, honestly, I don't do foreshadowing after the fact. I do it beforehand. And because I already know what I need to foreshadow, so I can go back in and I can add it beforehand. Yes?
You say the whole process is 4 weeks. How long is this in relation to 4 weeks?
It all depends. That's more just a lump amount that I just give myself, because sometimes, honestly, the pacing part, or the plot points, takes forever to figure out. This part usually honestly doesn't take nearly as long as you think. Usually like 3 or 4 days maybe. But frankly, at this point, the story is pretty firm in my head, and so I may not need to write a ton down. And frankly, and with each movie, I keep saying movie because I think of it as a movie in my head. Each book is different, and how much I need to remind myself, so by this point, I have a full outline with a completely detailed write-up, anything I need to know, so that when I sit down, I can just focus on writing and describing the movie that I've played in my head. The plot is finalized. Generally, I do have at least one scene that usually gets cut at some point because I'm writing it and realizing, oh, I'm repeating myself, and I didn't realize I was repeating myself, but I usually know within the first paragraph that, oh my gosh, why am I doing this, and I'll delete it. What's nice is that because I know the whole story, I can make changes without ruining the rest of the story. You know, it's kind of like with a presentation. I want to know this backwards and forwards so that when I get questions and we veer off on different topics, I can then come back without getting flustered or getting lost and get back to where I'm supposed to be. And then I just focus on the writing. I just focus on describing what it is that is there. And that really is when I sit down and write, I'm focused on dialogue. I'm focused on describing the character emotions, the setting, what everything looks like, and really focusing on the language of things, because I don't know about you, but I really struggle with making it sound good. So that is what I want. I want to take off as much stress as I can so I can focus on the writing. So that's my step process. As I said, it usually ends up with about 30 pages, 2,500 finished words to a page on average. Yes, real quick.
Do you do a character bio at all, or is that just in the 7-point structure?
I don't tend to, well, actually that's not true. I do actually have character sheets that I do for my main characters. Generally it's the main POV characters and the heroes and villains I do sometimes. It depends on the characters. Sometimes I just know who they are and I don't really need to flesh them out more. There's some people that come to you and you just know who they are, you know. And other times I need to work on it a little bit more. We're really low on time. I'm sorry. Yes?
You say this is roughly a month that you take for this. Do you then move on to another project and let this sit for a while, or do you then just start writing immediately?
I just go right into it. Like the minute it's done, I go right onto it and jump right into it. This is the direct link at the bottom, real quick. That is my email. If the direct link does not work for any reason, please feel free to email me directly, and I will send you everything that's on there. My plotting sheet has a lot of information on it, and in fact, actually does have my character sheet that I do use if I do a character sheet. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Sorry, this was long.